The silence of space had always been sacred to him. Cold, clean, unburdened by emotion. That silence had raised him, trained him, and kept him alive through 26 rotations of border patrol. But today, that silence had been broken. And not by screams, not by gunfire, but by a stupid transmission. One message, mistakenly routed through the wrong comms array, was all it took. Now everyone was dead. Corporal Bran was the only one left aboard the UNS Revenant. The ship had been torn open like a can of field rations. The walls were scorched black, bulkheads twisted, oxygen bleeding out in whispers. He still had fragments of bone stuck in his hair, someone else's. Maybe Lieutenant Carrick's. Hard to tell. He didn't even like Carrick. But he felt the weight all the same. Bran dragged his leg toward the bridge. It had taken shrapnel from the first hit, and blood followed him in dots. The overhead lights flickered dim and red, making everything look soaked in murder. He passed the body of Technician Lorne, face frozen mid-scream, mouth full of broken teeth. He didn't stop. Couldn't. The emergency generator wouldn't last long, and someone had to tell command what had just happened. Not that it would matter. They wouldn't believe it. Because it wasn't pirates, it wasn't raiders, it wasn't even some rogue AI faction like before. This was a mistake, a bad call, a misfire, an unintended breach of an unmarked signal band. Someone sent a message on the wrong frequency, one wrong line of code in an automated status report. A standard ping that somehow reached a system flagged as X99, unclaimed unstable. They'd called it a dead sector, nothing but a rumor, a pocket of forgotten stars beyond the galactic arm, abandoned by the old empires long before humans even had spaceflight. But it wasn't dead. And now he knew why. He made it to the bridge and keyed in the last of his strength into the access pad. Blood smeared the controls. The screen flickered, buzzed, then lit with the last known records of the attack. He played it back. It wasn't warships, not in the traditional sense. They weren't even visible on scans until it was too late. They moved like shadows, bent light, emitted no heat. Then they opened fire. No warning, no communications. Just annihilation, precision orbital strikes, hull-penetrating kinetics, plasma that melted steel like butter. Whoever they were, they didn't ask questions. They just reacted. And the source? A world below, gray, storm-covered, silent. The message had reached it. It had heard. And that planet had spoken back, with weapons no one had ever catalogued. Bran laughed, dry and bitter. One wrong damn ping, he whispered to himself. He uploaded the logs to the emergency beacon. Not that it would change anything. But it was protocol. It was his final duty. And deep down, it felt like a confession. Like if someone heard it, someone human, they might understand that this wasn't just a screw-up. It was a declaration. The Deathworld was real, and they'd woken it up. He limped to the viewport, watched the clouds of that world shifting like muscle under skin. Thunder cracked across the surface, blue and sickly. Something moved in the sky down there. Huge, slow, deliberate, like it knew he was watching. A signal flickered to life in his HUD. No source, no language, just coordinates, Earths. His stomach dropped. They weren't finished. And now the Deathworld was talking back, with guns, and Earth was next. The emergency beacon had reached Earth in less than 8 hours. 8 hours was all it took for every satellite above Sol to light up with priority Omega pings, all tagged with UN Command Black clearance. Deep below the crust of the Atlantic Defense Corps, inside a bunker they said could survive a planet killer, men in suits and generals in half-polished medals sat in a room full of war maps and outdated optimism. They watched the footage Corporal Bran had sent, grainy, bleeding with static, and they tried to pretend they understood what they were looking at. They didn't. Admiral Reese leaned forward, his knuckles clenched on the steel table. He was the oldest in the room, and the last survivor of the Terran-Mars conflict. The room waited for his words. But all he said was, "That world didn't just fire back. It retaliated with precision. That wasn't instinct, that was strategy." A man from intelligence, younger, cockier, too clean, cleared his throat. "There's no proof the message even triggered the attack. It could be—" "Spare us the committee voice, Gregor," Reese snapped. "We sent a signal. They responded with annihilation. You call it coincidence. I call it cause and effect." Across the room, a woman with a diplomatic crest on her collar finally asked, "Do we even know who they are?" Silence. Then someone played the frame again. Slowed, enhanced. The image stabilized for 1/10 of a second, long enough to see something behind the storm clouds on the Deathworld. Not a ship, not a drone. Something alive, massive, laced with metal like armor grown from bone, a single glowing red lens in the center of its skull-like face. And then it was gone. A black screen freeze. Debrief code X99. Threat confirmed. Class unknown. Reese exhaled slowly. "Get me Bran. If he's still alive, we need boots on the ground in sight. I don't trust AI to interpret something it doesn't understand." Corporal Bran didn't want to be rescued. When the scout ship arrived, a sleek silver dart of a thing with medical bots and too many questions, he had his rifle pointed at the door before it opened. They talked to him like a casualty, like a witness. They offered sedatives and said things like, "You're safe now." But he knew better. Nobody was safe now. The ride back to Earth felt like betrayal. He didn't want to leave. Every instinct told him he should have died out there with the rest of the Revenant's crew. Dying would have been easier than the guilt clawing through his gut. He had been the one to approve the autostatus ping, his clearance, his command, a lazy confirmation, a second too soon, on the wrong signal band. One press of a button had lit the fuse on a war nobody asked for. When he reached Earth, they didn't give him a parade. They gave him debriefings, psyche scans, nutritional injections, a handler who smiled too much. And finally, a chair in a dark room across from Admiral Reese himself. Reese studied him like a man inspecting a bomb that hadn't gone off yet. "You're the only surviving witness," the Admiral said without emotion. "That makes you a resource. You'll answer what we ask. You'll report what you saw, and you won't hold anything back, understood?" Bran stared at the wall behind the man's head. "You're going to war." Reese didn't blink. "If we must." Bran shook his head. "You don't understand. That place, it's not just another planet. It's a warning label disguised as a world. We were never supposed to find it, and we sure as hell weren't supposed to talk to it." "You think they're alive?" "They are the planet, or something buried in it, something that hears everything." Reese leaned in. "Then we'll teach it that Earth doesn't bow." Bran's laugh was hollow. "They already know, and they don't care." News didn't reach the public, not the real news anyway. Earth's media stayed quiet under blackout protocol. The net was flooded with distractions, a celebrity trial, a solar flare scare, a false alien sighting on Europa. The people slept through it all, while Command prepared for something far worse than war. They didn't send diplomats. They sent a fleet. It was called Operation Echo Silence. 100 ships, carriers, frigates, planet breakers with fusion cores. It launched from lunar base under the red shadow of Mars. No one watching from Earth knew what was really happening, and Bran was on the flagship. Not because he volunteered, but because Command thought they needed a human touch in the room, someone who had seen it firsthand, someone whose presence would make the data seem real. He sat in the observation deck, watching the Armada stretch across space like a metal storm. Ships shimmered with plasma shields. Fighters danced in precise formation. Everything about the fleet screamed confidence. But Bran felt nothing but dread. When they arrived at the X-99 system, the Deathworld looked the same. Gray. Cold. Shrouded in lightning, but now there were no stars around it. All the nearby systems had gone dark. Not powered down. Gone. Scans reported nothing, as if the neighboring stars had been erased from existence. A whisper passed through the fleet, not from their radios, from their dreams. Men started waking up in sweats. Techs began reporting whispers in their headsets. Old languages, childhood voices, dead mothers. One engineer cut out her own ears. A pilot locked himself in a torpedo tube. A medic reported seeing her own corpse in the reflection of her visor. And then the storm shifted. The Deathworld moved. Not tectonically, not meteorologically. The surface of the planet twisted, reorganized itself like a puzzle resetting. Mountain ranges folded down into plains. Oceans drained into the core. The clouds vanished like sucked through a vacuum. And in the center, something rose. A tower. No, a spire. Black, obsidian, laced with crimson veins. As tall as Earth's atmosphere was deep, a beacon of hate. At its peak was an eye, no longer just a lens, but something aware. Fleet Command issued a standard broadcast. "This is a United Nations Earth fleet. We come in peace. We seek understanding." The tower replied with a single, world-shaking sound. A thump, like a heart made of thunder and rage. Then the message came. Not through speakers, not through data, through blood. Every human on every ship heard it in their veins. "You speak to that which was left to sleep. You woke us. We remember." And then the fleet started dying. The first wave of energy wasn't even visible. It wasn't plasma or missiles or lasers. It was silence, weaponized. Ships went cold. Crews froze mid-sentence. Lights blinked out. Explosions happened in slow motion as if time itself had staggered. Bran saw it all from the deck. One by one, Earth's best burned in silence. He screamed orders. No one listened. Not because they disobeyed, but because their ears were bleeding. By the time the flagship broke formation and jumped away, only 6 ships remained. Bran stood at the glass, staring at the Deathworld shrinking behind them. It wasn't chasing. It didn't need to. It had made its point. Earth's high command called it a tactical failure, a glitch, a momentary lapse in protocol adherence. The survivors were scattered across med centers, half mad, full of guilt. And Bran? He was locked in a secure facility. No name, no location, just stone walls and mirrored windows. Rhys came to visit, this time without medals. He looked tired, older. "You're the only one still functional?" he said. "Tell me why." Bran didn't answer. Rhys tried again. "It spared you, just like last time." Bran's voice was a whisper. "Because I'm already broken." Rhys paused, then asked the question he had been circling all along. "What do they want?" Bran's answer came with a haunted stare. "They don't want anything. They just remember. We're not the first. We just spoke louder." And Earth had already been marked, coordinates burned into the stars, a path carved by fire and memory. The Deathworld had listened. And now, it was coming. Not as a ship, not as a fleet, but as a curse wrapped in the skin of a planet, a godless machine of vengeance, ancient, patient, and now, awake. They tried to keep it quiet. They always did. But you can't hide the death of 94 warships from the net forever. Not when pieces of hull plating fall through atmosphere like flaming wreckage. Not when widows of soldiers start screaming into cameras, begging for answers. Not when an entire quadrant of Earth's outer orbital defense goes dark. Not glitched, not malfunctioning, just missing. The lies started thin, a routine military drill, a deep space collision, rogue AI experimentation. But then the Revenant's original distress beacon was leaked, the raw version, unfiltered. It showed what the Deathworld did to the first crew, what it did to Bran's ship. The footage was grainy, yes, but clear enough for anyone with eyes to see the precision, the brutality, the cold intelligence behind the attack. No one could pretend it was an accident anymore. Earth's population didn't react with unity. It reacted with panic. Cities rioted. Mobs swarmed government buildings. Internet networks collapsed under the weight of conspiracy theories and desperate searches for truth. Martial law was declared in 12 nations. Civilians started stockpiling. Governments issued contradictory statements. The global economy cracked like a cheap panel. And through it all, one name kept circulating in the chaos: Bran. Some called him a hero, others called him a traitor. A few even claimed he was part of it, that he brought something back with him. A virus, a signal, a seed of the Deathworld embedded in his blood. He stayed locked in the same stone-walled room, half-lit, always cold. Rhys visited less now. The doctors came more often. Not with questions, but with fear in their eyes. They asked him if he'd had dreams, heard voices, felt his body changing, and always, they asked, "Did it speak to you again?" He stopped answering. Not because he couldn't, but because he had heard something, and he didn't want to know what it meant. 3 days before the sky opened, Earth's defense net picked up a distortion field, massive, slow-moving, miles across, entering the outer system. The math didn't make sense. There was no propulsion signature, no mass displacement trail. It just was. Like something stepped sideways through reality. Rhys was pulled out of retirement, unofficially, behind closed doors. Command needed a face the people still respected, someone who didn't crack under pressure. He met Bran in a bunker so deep it shook from geothermal pressure. "I need to know what's coming," Rhys said bluntly. Bran was thinner now, eyes sunken, a beard that no one had bothered to trim. He barely moved, just stared into the static of the wall monitor. "You already know," Bran said, voice dry as dust. "We don't understand the scale." Bran turned, slow and sharp. "That's your problem. You keep thinking scale matters. It's not about how big it is. It's about what it remembers." Rhys frowned. "Then tell me." Bran leaned forward, his voice low but clear. "We weren't the first. We weren't even the 1,000th. That world is a graveyard of civilizations that made the same mistake. They tried to speak, to explore, to make contact." He tapped his temple. "It doesn't want contact. It wants silence. It was the silence, until we broke it. The first global impact happened over Siberia. Not a ship, not a weapon, but a structure, a monolith. It descended through the clouds like a shadow falling over the sun. No heat, no sonic boom, just pressure, heavy, relentless. People within a 300-mile radius bled from their eyes. Screens flickered with unreadable symbols. Nuclear detectors went haywire, but nothing exploded. The monolith simply existed, impossible and massive. And then another landed in the Sahara, and one in the Atlantic. 9 in total, 1 on each continent, 1 on the moon. They made no sound, no threat. But wherever they stood, things changed. Gravity warped. Time slowed in subtle, maddening ways. Plants wilted, animals fled, people stopped sleeping. Children began drawing the same thing over and over. A tower, bleeding from its top, under a sky with no stars. Earth called it the invasion of silence. But no soldiers marched, no ships flew, no voice declared war, because the Deathworld didn't conquer. It infected. Bran knew what was happening. He'd seen the pattern. He broke containment himself, disabling the locks, knocking out 2 guards, and walking barefoot through snow and ash to reach what was left of Command HQ in Iceland. He found Reese sitting at a table alone, sifting through old paper files. Actual paper. No one used paper anymore. But they both knew the net was compromised. "You should have listened," Brand said, voice gravel thick from disuse. Reese didn't look up. "We did. That's the worst part." Brand sat opposite him. "I need to go back," he said. "To the Deathworld? Number to the monolith here." Reese finally looked up. His eyes were cracked with red. "Why?" "Because it listens to me." He didn't mean it metaphorically. As Bran approached the monolith, alone, unarmed, with nothing but the clothes he'd slept in, the world around it pulsed, like it recognized him. The guards stationed nearby collapsed. Not dead. Not harmed. Just gone. Staring upward, breathing shallow, as if put into hibernation. Bran stepped into the shadow of the monolith, and it spoke, not with sound, but through memory, through guilt, through every face he'd ever watched die. He fell to his knees, choking on names he hadn't said in years. Blood ran from his nose. His heart raced, skipped, surged, but he didn't pull away. He whispered through broken teeth, "I understand." And the monolith responded, not in words, but in images, of the first ones, creatures that stood like gods and vanished in fire, of empires that mapped galaxies, then were torn down to static, of races who made machines so vast they built stars, and then were silenced when they reached too far, spoke too loud. They'd all done it, sent signals, reached out, woke it. This wasn't a planet. It was the memory of vengeance, left behind, buried in a world so hostile that only silence could live there. And when something broke that silence, even by accident, it didn't forgive. It remembered. And now, through Bran, it had a voice again. He returned to Reese 3 days later. No escort, no explanation, just a single sentence. "We either stop talking or we all die." Reese didn't answer, because he knew what that meant. No more ships, no more transmissions, no more digital life, no more Earth as it existed. Silence was the only language the Deathworld respected. But Earth didn't know how to be quiet. Meanwhile, deep in the Pacific Trench, seismic activity surged. Not tectonic, not volcanic. Something pushing upward. The ocean boiled, and radar blacked out for 3,000 miles. And then, just before the feeds cut off, a signal pierced the static. 4 words. Bran heard it in his sleep. So did Reese. So did every child born in the last year. "Earth has spoken enough." And then the trench opened. Not just water, not just pressure, but something older than stars, rising beneath the waves. It rose slowly at first, not like a monster clawing its way out of hell, but like something tired of hiding, something ancient, steady, and sure of its dominance. The Pacific churned for hours before the surface broke, and when it did, the water didn't explode. It parted. The first thing to emerge was black stone. Smooth. Too smooth. The kind of surface that shouldn't exist in nature, shaped by time or pressure. It reflected nothing. Not the sun, not the sky. Just pure void. The waves rolled away from it like they were afraid to touch. And then came the sound. Not thunder, not a roar, but a tone, low, constant, like the grinding of stars collapsing on themselves. It vibrated through the crust. Animals fled. Birds fell from the sky. Entire ecosystems collapsed in a single hour. Fish floated to the surface, dead-eyed, bleeding from their gills. What surfaced next made every satellite in orbit drop connection for 7 full seconds. A structure, tall as Everest, pulsing with crimson veins of energy, rose from the trench like the spine of a god, and above it, floating like a crown, was a sphere. Black. Silent. Rotating slowly with a gravity all its own. Scientists tried to measure it, couldn't, They fired drones. Nothing came back. Submarines were sent. They were crushed into atoms. And still the structure kept rising until half its body breached into the air, casting a shadow over half the Pacific Rim. It became known, unofficially, as the Heart of Silence. And Bran? He could hear it calling his name. They kept him locked in the Arctic facility after his return from the monolith. Too dangerous, too connected. He didn't argue anymore. He ate what they gave him, slept when they told him. But they couldn't lock his mind. Every night it whispered, not in words, in memories, not just his, other people's, other species. He saw entire civilizations rise and fall in minutes. He felt their screams before they were erased. He smelled the smoke of burning planets, tasted ash, died 100 deaths in dreams that weren't dreams at all. And in all of it, he sensed one truth. This wasn't an invasion, it was a ritual. Earth tried to fight. They launched the Polaris-class dreadnought Absolution straight at the Heart of Silence. It carried a quantum detonation core meant to crack moons in half. It never made it within 100 miles. The ship disappeared from scans. One second it was there, the next it wasn't. No explosion, no impact, just gone. The detonation core never went off. The fail-safes never triggered. Earth Command lost connection like someone had unplugged the universe. Later, they found pieces of the Absolution embedded in the walls of people's homes in Argentina. Not scattered. Not dropped. Embedded. Like the ship had been folded and placed there. Like a message. Bran read it loud and clear. Stop screaming. Rhys came to see him again. The old man had aged 10 years in 10 days. His uniform looked loose, his eyes red. He said nothing for the first few minutes, just stood there staring through the reinforced glass of Bran's cell. Finally, he asked, "Do we even have a chance?" Bran shook his head slowly. "Not if we keep treating this like a war." "Then what is it?" Bran looked up. "A reckoning." Rhys clenched his fists. "Then why are you still alive?" Bran hesitated, then said, almost softly, "Because I'm the one who knocked." The madness started 2 days later. Not from the sky, from inside. People began hearing things, static in their ears, voices they couldn't explain, songs from languages that never existed. Men walked into the sea, smiling. Women carved shapes into walls they swore they'd never seen before. Children stood still for hours, eyes rolled back, whispering coordinates. Some begged for silence, others tore out their tongues. Hospitals were overwhelmed, not with injuries, but with fear. People losing their grip on reality, fast. And when sleep stopped working, when dreams became battlegrounds, society began to crack. Internet crashed for hours at a time. Systems overloaded. Power grids failed in cities untouched by the heart. People said it was sabotage. Bran knew better. The heart was pulsing. And it wasn't just killing. It was remembering through us, using us. They came for Bran in the middle of the night. A joint task force, American, Russian, Chinese, no emblems, just guns and urgency. They dragged him out, shoved him into a black aircraft, and flew him across dead skies. No explanation. No destination. Just silence. He wasn't surprised when they landed on a floating platform near the edge of the Pacific. The Heart of Silence loomed in the distance, impossibly still, impossibly vast, a wound in the horizon. Rhys was there, waiting, dressed in cold weather gear, face haggard. "We've got a lab," he said. "We've got a team, and we've got a theory." Bran raised an eyebrow. "You want to shut it down?" "We want to know if it can be shut down." Bran followed him into the lab, a dome of reinforced alloy and desperation. Scientists worked in silence, wearing noise-canceling helmets. AI systems flickered nervously, never staying online more than 10 seconds at a time. Reese led Bran to a central chamber. Inside, a pulsating shard of black stone, cut from the base of one of the smaller monoliths, contained inside a sphere of electromagnetic force. "It sings," Reese said, "but only to you." Bran stared at it. His skin tingled. His heart jumped. He stepped forward, and the sphere responded. The shard glowed faint red. Monitors began to spike. AI readouts screamed, "Cognitive interference, multidimensional bleed, psionic link detected." Bran closed his eyes, and the heart opened. His mind wasn't in the lab anymore. It was inside the storm. He floated above the Deathworld. No, within it. He saw the truth. Billions of years ago, before life had even formed on Earth, this thing had been born. Not in a womb, not in a factory, but in the collapsing silence of a dying universe. It was not alive. It was not dead. It was the echo of extinction itself. Every time something reached too far, created life too intelligent, too hungry, too loud, the heart remembered. And the silence came. A balance, enforced by memory, enforced by erasure. He saw civilizations beg for mercy. He saw it listen, then judge, then cleanse. The Deathworld had been left as a warning, a prison, or maybe a temple, and Earth had been the latest to knock on its rusted gates. Bran opened his eyes. He was on the floor, gasping, bleeding from his ears. Reese stood over him, pale. "What did you see?" Bran whispered. "Not an enemy." "Then what?" "A mirror." He knew what had to be done. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a virus. It wasn't even a plan. It was surrender, not to the heart, but to silence. Earth had to stop transmitting. Every satellite, every AI, every signal, every human voice recorded, every data stream, every broadcast, every pulse of binary. Total digital death. The only offering the heart respected. Silence. Reese shook his head. "We can't go dark. We'd collapse." Bran stared at him. "We're collapsing anyway." And then, right on cue, the heart pulsed again. This time it wasn't subtle. Tsunamis rose, magnetospheres wobbled. Every human being on Earth heard the same thing in their skull, burned into the space between heartbeats. "Speak once more, and we will become you." The vote lasted 12 minutes. In a bunker beneath the ruins of Geneva, what was left of the United Earth Council gathered behind sealed doors and emergency lights. The walls groaned from seismic shifts. One of the heart's pulses had torn a fault line through southern France the night before. They didn't argue for long. There was nothing left to debate. Reese made the case. Bran sat silently beside him, gaunt and still, as if already mourning the decision. No one asked for a second opinion, because the Earth was out of time. When the vote passed, Reese simply nodded and said, "Begin the blackout." The global shutdown was codenamed Operation Quiet Sun. It was the most drastic act of self-destruction humanity had ever conceived. Not out of panic, but precision. Every AI core was deactivated. Every satellite was burned from orbit. Data centers were detonated. Internet infrastructure physically severed at major junctions. Governments broadcast one final message. This is not surrender. This is preservation. For 1 month, Earth will go dark. All transmissions must cease. Speak only when it is safe to live again. People didn't take it well. In New York, riots erupted as digital addicts lost access to the net they'd built their lives around. In Tokyo, citizens held silent vigils beneath LED screens that blinked out one by one. In Moscow, police shot their own servers before abandoning the Kremlin. In the middle of it all, Bran watched from a mountain bunker with Reese. No cameras, no communication, just isolation, rations, and the steady heartbeat of a dying planet going mute. He knew the worst wasn't the darkness. It was the withdrawal. People didn't know how to live without being heard. After the 6th day, the heart of silence stopped pulsing. Seismic waves calmed. Tides stabilized. The sky over the Pacific cleared, and the storms that had choked the atmosphere for weeks vanished. Scientists, those still working analog, reported a complete halt in monolith growth and psionic interference. The world held its breath. Had it worked? Was silence the offering the heart had demanded? Bran didn't celebrate. He sat alone in a steel room with no lights, no sound, no company. And still, even in silence, he heard it. Not a voice, a presence. The Deathworld wasn't gone. It was listening, watching, measuring humanity's ability to obey. On the 12th day of silence, a breach occurred. It started small, a forgotten relay on a decommissioned satellite in low orbit. Somehow, somewhere, someone turned it on again. Maybe by mistake. Maybe on purpose. The signal was weak, a heartbeat's worth of digital static. But it was enough. Bran felt it before anyone else. He woke up screaming. Rhys was at his side in seconds, gripping his arms. What happened? Bran's eyes were glassy. Someone spoke. Rhys ran to the terminal, one of the last analog-coded lines left. A tech officer confirmed it. A relay had reactivated. Rhys whispered, "How much data did it send?" The officer answered without turning around. "Not data. Just a call sign." "A name? What name?" The officer slowly looked back, face pale. "Bran." By nightfall, one of the monoliths, the one in Argentina, moved. Not physically, not yet. But something shifted in its energy field. A vibration so low it could only be felt in teeth and bones. Bran sat in the dark and listened. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He whispered only one thing. "They found me." Command tried to isolate the signal. Failed. The relay burned itself out, literally melted. But the damage was done. In the skies above the Pacific, the floating sphere above the heart of silence began to glow for the first time. Not red, not black, but white. A blinding, sun-colored fury. Something had changed. They had broken their silence, and the heart was answering. The next 24 hours unfolded like a countdown to judgment. Plants began to wilt in unnatural patterns. Circles of dead growth. Animals fled cities. In one rural village in central India, every child under 10 years old stopped speaking altogether. They didn't blink, didn't eat, just stared at the sky. The monoliths began humming. Not loudly, but steadily, in the exact frequency of a human heartbeat. It wasn't a weapon yet. It was warning. Bran went to Rhys, wild-eyed, shaking. "We broke the pact. It was our one chance and we threw it away." Rhys paced, frantic. "We find the source. We destroy it. Maybe we can still salvage—" "No," Bran cut him off. "You don't understand. They don't care who spoke. They only care that someone did." Rhys froze, and Bran said the words he'd been dreading. "We have to offer something else now. Something more." That night, Bran walked alone into the silence chamber, the sealed dome where the shard of the monolith was still kept under heavy guard. Only now, there were no guards. They'd all walked away an hour before, dazed, bleeding from their ears. He stepped into the containment circle. The shard pulsed red, then white. He knelt, and for the first time he didn't resist. He let it in. The memories hit harder than before. Not images this time, emotions, echoes of rage, sorrow, an entire galaxy's worth of grief fed into his mind like blood into a vein. He screamed until his voice tore, and then he whispered, "Take me." The shard stopped pulsing, and in that moment Bran knew the heart didn't want Earth. It wanted him, not as punishment, but as payment. He found Rhys the next morning. Rhys looked half dead, gray and slow and hollow-eyed from too many nights without sleep. "I know what it wants," Bran said. Rhys already knew. He didn't ask Bran to explain. He just nodded once and said, "I'm sorry." Bran forced a smile. "Don't be. You saved the rest of them. That's more than most men get." There was no ceremony, no goodbyes, no camera to record it, just a skiff, a cold wind, and a slow ride toward the Pacific, toward the heart, now glowing like a second sun. Bran stood on the bow, jacket open, wind ripping through him. His mind was already halfway gone, but not broken. He understood now. Silence wasn't just absence, it was mercy. It was the final gift of a galaxy that had learned to stop screaming. And now, Bran would carry that silence into the heart as its final messenger, or its final victim. The boat disappeared beneath the light. The heart pulsed once, then again, and then, for the first time in months, every monolith vanished. No explosion, no collapse, just gone. The sky cleared, the animals returned, children began to speak again, and for the first time in human history, Earth fell completely silent. Not out of fear, not out of threat, but in remembrance of the man who paid the price for their voice. There was no pain, no burning, no tearing, no suffocating collapse like he expected. When the light of the heart swallowed Bran, it felt like warm water and ice at once, a contradiction that didn't care if his body survived it. Because the truth was, his body didn't matter anymore. Not here, not inside it. There were no stars, no sound, no orientation, just white, stretching forever but also pressing right against his skin like a second layer. He wasn't floating, he wasn't falling, he was simply being. Then the voices came. But they weren't words, they were memories, spoken in emotion, in shape, in suffering. He saw a world burn, one with golden skies and crystal seas. He felt the desperation of beings who tried to communicate through color and light. They reached out to the stars in joy. They were erased. He saw another race, 10 armed creatures who carved mathematics into planets with orbiting beams of light. They discovered faster than light travel using biological cores. They were erased. And then another and another, all of them punished not for war or greed or cruelty, but for reaching beyond their silence, for trying to connect, for trying to speak into a void that never wanted to answer. And then the heart spoke to him. Not in rage, not in fury, but in sadness. It showed him itself. Not a god, not a machine, not even a consciousness, just a collection of endings. It was the graveyard of memory, a mechanism left behind by something else, something older, long gone, that once feared what the universe might become if allowed to evolve unchecked. A fail-safe. The heart wasn't alive. It was coded instinct. A living extinction protocol with no master, no morals, only triggers. And Bran had become its first interpreter. He saw his own memory flash into view. The transmission. That moment he pressed send. That tiny, stupid mistake that had become everything. And yet, the heart didn't show anger. It showed curiosity. Because Bran had come willingly. He hadn't run. He hadn't tried to fight it with bombs or pride. He had walked into the void with his soul exposed, and the heart had never seen that before. You seek understanding, it said, using no mouth, no voice, just clarity. Bran nodded, or thought that he did. I do. You carry suffering, it continued. I deserve to. You carry guilt. I want to. It keeps me human. There was silence then. A different kind of silence. The kind that waits. Then the heart asked, What is humanity? And Bran saw everything flash at once. Wars, kindness, famine, songs, genocide, love, fire, laughter, betrayal, heroism, fear, hope, hate. He felt ashamed of it, all of it, but also proud. Not because of what humanity had done, but because they'd kept trying. They had dared to speak, even when silence loomed like a blade. And that, Bran understood, was what made them different from the ones that had come before. The heart showed him 100 civilizations that fell silent when warned. They buried their satellites, destroyed their AI, disconnected their worlds. They chose to survive in darkness and were allowed to live. But none had ever spoken again. None had ever earned their voice back. Until now. Bran wasn't asked to plead. He wasn't asked to justify his species. Instead, the heart listened. And then, impossibly, the white void began to crack. Thin, spiderweb-like fractures of light bleeding into color. And suddenly, there was a sky. Not Earth's sky, but a canvas of stars, real ones, forming around him like a gift. It wasn't his world, but it was a place, a new place, and the heart whispered, "We remember through silence, you remember through pain. There is space for both." When Bran woke, he was lying in grass. Not dirt, not metal, but living grass, yellow-green, software. The sky above him swirled violet and gold. Stars shifted in slow, impossible patterns. No sun, no moon, just light that moved like thought. He sat up. His body was whole. Stronger, even. His scars were gone, his wounds erased. But he could feel everything he'd carried. The weight of it, the grief. That remained. And somehow that comforted him. Because he wasn't reborn. He was remembered. In the distance, he saw others. Not people, not exactly. Shapes, echoes, beings of color and movement. The remnants of those who had come before. The civilizations that had once been erased were not truly gone. They had been stored inside this space, this silent cradle at the edge of understanding. And Bran was now part of it. Not dead, not dreaming, just different. The first human mind preserved in the vault of extinction. The first man to be accepted, not by war, but by willing sacrifice. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the world had changed. The skies were calm, the oceans still. The people quieter, not broken, but aware. The monoliths were gone, yet the silence remained, revered. Memorials were built, not of statues, but of silence chambers, where no sound was allowed, and no device was welcome. In the center of each one, Bran's name, etched in stone. No quote, no speech. Just the man who had learned to listen. And in the hearts of many, when they closed their eyes and sat in the quiet, they thought, just maybe, they could hear him. Not in words, but in peace. There was no sky, no air, no up, no down. When the light took Bran, it didn't pull him apart like he'd expected. He'd imagined being crushed, burned, dissolved, but the heart of silence had no interest in killing him. It simply took him out of context. He felt himself separate, not his limbs or bones, but his meaning. What he was, what he believed, everything that made him Bran was unmade, stripped of time, name, language. He was thought, sensation, grief, and memory, floating in a vast presence that watched without blinking. And in that presence, something stirred. Not anger, not curiosity, something like recognition. Then came the first whisper, not in his ears but in the marrow of his soul. You are the voice that broke the still. He couldn't speak. There was no mouth, no breath, no sound. But the heart heard anyway. It didn't ask him questions in words. It forced him to remember. He relived it all, the accidental transmission, the moment his screen flashed blue and error codes rained, the way the UN's Revenant had shuddered before being torn apart like paper. He saw Carrick screaming, Lorne burned alive, the bulkheads imploding as blood and fire mingled in zero-G. He remembered how he lived, when he shouldn't have. The guilt bloomed again, fresh and heavy, but the heart did not recoil. It drank it in, and then showed him more. The stars unfolded around him like eyes opening. Civilizations older than Earth's continents flickered into view. He saw spires piercing nebulae, cities orbiting black holes, beings who wove time into shapes with their bare hands. All of them, gone, erased not by war, not by famine, but by the same thing that had drawn humanity to the stars: the desire to speak. One by one, these great empires had sent their voices into the void. Music, math article warnings, greetings. And each time, the heart had responded the same way. With silence. Then, cleansing. Not because it hated them, but because it had been programmed to preserve balance by enforcing quiet. The heart had no morality. It had no ego. It was simply a machine, left behind by something older, long dead, created to ensure the universe never became too loud, never too alive. And now, Bran had disturbed that stillness. Only this time, he came back. You were meant to be forgotten, the heart said. And for a moment, Bran agreed. He had died, hadn't he? That was the only reasonable answer. Everything after the Revenant, after the monoliths, after the white light, all of this was just the dying hallucination of a man who had failed the galaxy. But something about the stillness here was too perfect, too aware. He wasn't hallucinating, he was being studied. Then the heart showed him Earth, not as it was now, but as it would be if silence held. Cities rebuilt without digital noise, children raised without endless input, a planet slower, quieter, more present, not primitive, just attentive. But then came the alternate vision. What Earth would become if the silence broke again. It wasn't war, it was absorption. The heart did not bomb. It did not conquer, it simply overwrote. It remade matter into stillness. It turned signal into static, life into memory, memory into archive. Bran saw Earth hollowed out, not in flame, but in meaning, a living museum of silence. And he realized what was at stake. The heart was not warning them. It was offering a choice. Why me? Bran thought, not accusingly, but honestly. Why not wipe me too? The response was instant. You offered yourself. That was the difference. Every race before had fought, run, begged, or ignored. He had walked into the void, without weapons, without pride, and the heart had listened. In all its time, billions of years, trillions of screams, it had never been approached. Only provoked. That intrigued it. Bran now floated not in void, but in a kind of architecture. It was not made of stone or steel. It was built from remembrance, every erased world, every lost tongue, every vanished face. Their memories layered the space like gravity. He could feel them. The first ones. They weren't alive. But they existed. Fragments encoded in stillness, a warning, and now he was among them, but not dead. Not yet. And then he saw himself, not his body. That was long gone. He saw a version of himself walking across a plain of light. Behind him stretched a trail of thoughts, regrets, choices. The heart placed its awareness beside his. Then asked again, "What is humanity?" This time Bran answered with truth, not defense. Broken, beautiful, selfish, brave. We build things we don't understand and love things we can't protect. We try, we fail, we fight, we dream. He hesitated. Most of us don't know how to be quiet, but we can learn. The heart didn't respond for a long time. Just watched him, weighed him, and then, without warning, Bran was falling. Not physically, but back to Earth. Not alive, not dead, but present. Bran woke in a chamber of stone. No wires, no machines, no noise. He sat up, gasping, lungs filling with air that tasted like dirt and memory. The walls were lined with carvings, silent patterns of stars and shapes he'd seen in the heart. Someone had etched them here. But who? He stepped outside and saw a valley. Untouched, green, silent. In the distance, a village. Simple homes, people tilling soil with hand tools, children painting pictures in dirt, no tech, no noise. And when he walked among them, they knew him. They didn't bow, they didn't cheer. They simply placed a hand over their chest, the universal gesture of stillness. And Bran understood. He was no longer just a man. He was the memory of noise that taught a world how to be quiet. Somewhere, far above, the heart remained. Dormant, waiting, listening. Not for another transmission, but for understanding. And in the quiet of that earth, one reborn in stillness, Bran walked among them as the first human ever to be heard by something that didn't speak. The first generation born after the silence had never heard a ringtone. They'd never seen flashing screens, never lived by the hum of satellite broadcasts, or heard the digital voices that once filled the airwaves like white noise. They lived in the quiet, by candlelight and wind, by real stars and whispered stories. And at the heart of those stories was Bran. Not Bran the soldier, not Bran the technician, but Bran the last voice. Some called him the one who walked into the storm. Others called him the memory that was heard. There were no statues of him, no broadcasts, no books bearing his name. But in every silent chamber carved into rock, children were taught his story through gesture and sign. Hands moved in silence to trace his path. The mistake, the war, the surrender, the walk into the light. His name was not spoken, but it was remembered. It had been 20 years since the heart last moved. 20 years of quiet skies. 20 years of no broadcasts, no ships launched beyond the gravity well, no experiments in deep space signal research. Humanity had obeyed, not out of fear, not entirely, but out of respect, because the price had been too great. And what was left of the old world, those who had seen the monoliths with their own eyes, knew what waited in the stars if they broke the pact. The heart was still there, hanging in the void like a sleeping god, watching, and everyone knew it could wake again. But not everyone agreed it should stay asleep. The boy was 16 the first time he found the hidden room. His name was Thomas, and he was born in one of the mountain settlements in what used to be Eastern Europe, a place now called Veilwatch, one of many communities formed in the shadow of the silence. He was curious more than most, restless. He asked too many questions. Why had humanity stopped reaching? What lay beyond the sky? Why were they so afraid to speak? And worst of all, what if the heart had been misunderstood? The elders hushed him each time, at first gently, then with fear in their eyes. But the seed had been planted. And one day, while scavenging the remains of an old pre-silence research outpost buried in stone and time, Thomas found the room. It was shielded, a door marked in faded yellow with the symbol of the Old Earth Alliance. Inside was a terminal, dust-covered, dead, but beside it, a book, handwritten. Bran's book. It wasn't supposed to exist. Bran had never published anything, but these were his thoughts, not as commander, not as sacrifice, but as a man. The first page was short. If this is read, then silence has failed, or worse, been abandoned. If you're reading this, you must know one truth. The heart did not forgive. It tolerated. You are not safe. You are only tolerated for now. Speak again, and you may not be spoken to. You may be consumed. Thomas read it again and again, but it didn't frighten him. It fascinated him. Bran had walked into the storm, but come out again. Alive. Changed. He hadn't died for silence. He had negotiated with it. And that meant maybe it wasn't a god. Maybe it was a gate. A test. Thomas started rebuilding the transmitter 3 months later. In secret. Hidden beneath the roots of an old transmission tower, he scavenged components from pre-silence ruins, salvaged copper wire from ruined solar grids, and restored old schematics that had once been banned from circulation. He told no one. Not because he was ashamed, but because he knew the silence was a religion now, and he was becoming its heretic. The transmitter was small, nothing powerful, not enough to reach orbit, barely enough to cross a continent. But that wasn't his goal. He wasn't trying to call the stars. He just wanted to speak, to dare. The night he turned it on, the world didn't end. The skies didn't split open. The heart didn't descend in fire and memory. It was quiet, almost mocking. He waited hours, nothing. The next day he activated it again, and again. He read old stories, recited poems, described what Earth had become, spoke to Bran like he was still out there, floating between light and machine. And still, no answer. Until the 9th night. He fell asleep with the transmitter humming gently. When he woke, the device was cold. Dead. But beside it, on the screen, a single symbol had appeared. One he hadn't programmed, a circle, split by a vertical line. The same symbol etched above the ancient silent chambers. The mark of the heart. It had heard him. Thomas didn't tell the village. Not at first. He wasn't sure what the symbol meant. Approval? Warning? He waited for more. And it came. 3 days later, in a dream that felt too real to be fiction. He stood on a field of ash, stars rotating like gears above him. And in the distance, a tower, a spire of black glass and red light, pulsing with the same rhythm as his heart. He walked toward it, and as he reached the base, he heard it. Bran's voice, clear, alive, not broken, not defeated. Just older. Why did you speak, Thomas? Thomas answered without fear. Because I need to know who we are if we can't reach. There was silence. And then you already know, because you did. He woke up with blood on his nose and heat in his chest. He'd touched it, whatever it was. He wasn't erased, not yet. He was still being measured. And that meant something deeper. The test wasn't over. Humanity had thought silence was the price of survival. But Thomas began to believe something else. That silence was the first question, and voice might be the second. The wind over Veilwatch felt different. It wasn't colder or stronger, just tense, like the sky itself had taken a breath and hadn't let it go. Crops stopped growing that week. The birds, which had returned after the silence, vanished without migration. And in the distance, near the peaks that scraped the clouds, came the lights. Not fire, not lightning. Something else. Pale white columns that flickered like the aurora, but moved with purpose. They twisted, folded, and at times glowed red, pulsing not randomly, but with intention. It didn't take long for the elders to understand. The heart had heard again. And it was responding. Thomas stood on the edge of the mountain village, looking up into the light. He hadn't touched the transmitter since that night, hadn't dared. He hadn't needed to. Whatever he had awoken had eyes now, and they were fixed on Earth once more. But there was no fear in him, only urgency. He felt it in his blood, the sense that something huge was moving toward them, not like a ship or a weapon, but like a question, a final test. They came for him at dawn. 2 men in black robes, faces lined with silence. Keepers of the old pact. They said nothing, just placed a single piece of old, hand-scratched metal in his palm. The same symbol from his dream. The same one Bran once carried on his chest. The mark of the remembered voice. He was being called. They brought him to the threshold, a place no one spoke of aloud, because it had no need for words. It was deep in the earth, beneath the fractured remains of an old planetary defense system. What had once been a war bunker was now a chamber of stillness. And in the center, the shard. No longer kept behind glass, no longer bound by force fields. It sat on stone, black, jagged, and alive. When Thomas stepped into the room, the shard pulsed. Once. Then again. He dropped to his knees, not out of reverence but reaction. His chest tightened, his eyes blurred, not in pain, in clarity, and the moment he touched it, the world fell away. There was no time in the place the shard took him. No past, no future. Only now. The stars were gone. The void had shape now, architecture made of thought, bending and folding around him like origami, and at its center stood Bran. Not a ghost, not a projection. But Bran. Changed, older than his years, but untouched by time. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Thomas understood him the same way you understand gravity, not because it's explained, but because it pulls. Bran gestured to the light above them, and Thomas saw the heart. But not as a planet, not as a monolith. He saw it as it truly was, a mind, vast and ancient, built of the remnants of 10,000 silenced civilizations. Their memories were its blood, their erasure its law. And yet, inside it now pulsed something new. Hesitation. Thomas asked, not aloud, but through intent. Why did you stop listening? The heart answered not with words, but with images, of wars caused by messages sent across light years, of destruction triggered by discovery, of species that tried to spread, not understanding the cost of contact. It showed the silence it enforced was not cruelty, but containment. And Thomas, barely 16, replied in the only way he could. He listened back. He let the heart feel his thoughts, not just logic, but emotion, his doubts, his wonder, his fear of never knowing what was out there, his hunger to grow, not to dominate, but to connect. and he let it feel one more thing: his love for the people he would never know. The ones who hadn't been born yet, who deserved a chance to find their place in the stars without being erased. And for the first time in eternity, the heart paused. Bran stepped forward. He placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder and spoke with voice this time, soft, weathered, but filled with quiet certainty. "They've never asked before. Not like this." Thomas looked up at him. "What happens now?" Bran looked back at the heart and said, "We give them a chance to ask again." Back on Earth, the sky cracked open, not with fire, not with war, but with a single blinding thread of white light that reached from the clouds down to the sea, and then folded itself into a single object, a monolith. But different. It hummed, but not in fear. Its tone was gentle, a pulse like breath. And then, to every mind on Earth, old and young, farmer and engineer, the same message echoed in pure thought: "We will listen, speak once more, and be known." But it came with a warning, one final truth. The next voice Earth sent would define it. The heart had opened itself, not for endless conversation, not for politics or pride, but for one last opportunity to justify humanity's place in the web of memory. If the voice that spoke was loud, selfish, arrogant, Earth would be silenced again, not in anger, but as part of the pattern. If the voice spoke with humility, with truth, with purpose, then the stars would open, and the silence would finally end. Thomas returned to Veilwatch under a sky clearer than any in 100 years. The people met him not with cheers, but with silence. Respectful silence, because they knew what had happened. The elders brought him to the quiet chamber, where the ancient transmitter, once banned, now stood exposed. He placed his hands on the panel, took a breath, and spoke. Not long, not loud, just a few simple words. "We remember. We ask again. Not to conquer, but to understand. Speak back if you are still listening." The stars didn't answer that night, but one did. In the far distance, barely a flicker, a single blinking beacon pulsed. Not from the heart, not from Earth, from somewhere else. Another world, another voice. Not erased, still speaking, still hoping, and for the first time in forever, they were heard. Part 8 complete. Final, 1,500 plus words. Humanity didn't win by fire or submission, but by finally understanding how to speak in a universe that had forgotten how to listen. Thomas opened the stars again. Bran became the bridge, and the heart of silence, no longer a weapon, but a gatekeeper. The galaxy waits, and Earth is no longer afraid to speak.